Welcome to Technology and Education Today. I'm Richard Smith.
And I'm Caroline Crawford.
And today we're discussing the need for keeping students in college. You know, we have a lot of students enrolling.
Retention, you mean?
Retention, yeah.
Thank you.
Good word. We have a lot of students enrolling in college, but not as many graduating as we would like. For instance, you might have a college like the University of Texas was actually has done a very good study on this, and we have let's say at the end of 6 years, we have maybe only 60% of these incoming freshmen have graduated with a 4-year degree after 6 years.
Meaning they haven't transferred to a different university, they've dropped out? Or are they stopped out, or what do you specifically?
They haven't graduated.
They haven't graduated from UT Austin.
They haven't, right.
Okay.
And the same thing is true for other schools. But interestingly, your chances of graduating within 6 years go up considerably if you come from a family with a higher income. So that if you come from a family in a lower income, let's say in the bottom 25% of incomes, your chances of graduating within 6 years go down to maybe 25%. It's extremely low.
That's amazing.
It is amazing, and it's a problem that is in evidence in many colleges and universities. And interestingly enough, I was reading an article.
Have they reviewed the data at other universities, or is this specifically focused on University of Texas Austin?
I don't know what's going on at the other universities.
I'm just checking to see if they tested other places.
But the University of Texas at Austin, one professor there has noticed this problem about 15 years ago. He's a chemistry professor, David Laud. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I've got the New York Times article here. Noticed that in his class of 500 freshmen, that's 500
One class
freshmen,
of 500?
Wow. 500. That there was not a normal distribution of grades. In other words, it didn't go from D to
the bell curve,
C and then up to A in the normal distribution. It was actually, I guess what they call bimodal. Mm-hmm. And there were a whole bunch of students that had B's and A's, and then there were a whole bunch that had D's and F's. And so he was wondering what the factors were that were causing this, and he did some research, grabbed the students' records. And
what a great instructor that was focused on making sure that his students were successful.
Yes, and as he did this, it became evident that students who came from families that were in the upper income levels.
Now, he didn't glean this data from the students. The students weren't self-selecting and offering information.
It was all in records from UT. He found those students who...
From the student files?
Right. That came from higher income families were more likely to do better in his course than students who came from low income families. And in general, the students coming from the low income families were students from various minority groups. These might be Hispanic, might be low income white students from rural areas of Texas, could be African Americans. And he was trying to figure out, well, what was going on here? Well, one of the things that they noticed, of course, is that the way students are selected for the University of Texas is that they take the top 7% of students across the state of Texas.
Based upon SAT scores?
No, based upon their class rank.
Okay. And
it used to be a top 10%, but it's so competitive there that they had to reduce it down to the top 7%. So this meant that you had students who came from schools like...
schools from all over Texas.
All over Texas.
No designation about the size of the school or the school district.
Some schools were clearly middle-class schools with higher incomes, and those students generally had SAT scores that went over 1,200 combined out of 1,600. And then you had students who were also graduating in the top 7% of their class, and their scores were considerably lower. They were normal scores, around 1,000, 1,100 combined, but considerably lower.
When you say score, you're talking about SAT scores?
SAT scores. And so what would happen is that they would get into the freshman class, chemistry or whatever class, and everybody feels kind of overwhelmed. But
absolutely,
the students who were coming from the schools where they had lower SAT scores their academic preparation wasn't quite as good as the students coming from these highly
Well, that's an
competitive
assumption.
schools. Right. It wasn't,
Reasoning being, he wasn't looking at finding out the reason why
Right, but-
whatever happened in high school happened. He was looking at, from this point forward, how do I ensure my students successful?
yes.
Okay.
But the bottom line here is that those students weren't doing terribly well. And so he said, well, he's trying to figure out what he could do for them and why this is, because on the face of it, they're just seemingly just as intelligent as anybody else. And so he moved them, he allowed them to self-choose into a class which he called I think the Texas Interdisciplinary Project. And these students then took the exact same chemistry class as the rest of the students, except they were there with themselves, students who came from similar backgrounds. And along with that, they had this little status item tacked on to them, Texas Interdisciplinary Project or Program.
But they received additional instruction
And
than
they also,
the kids,
as
the
part of
students
that,
in the other
right,
courses,
as
right?
part of that, they received additional tutorial work, and he was able to deal with them at a much more personal level because there were only 50 students in there. And as it turned out, they got the exact.
If I was a B student in
got-
his other classes, I'd be
Yes.
rather upset that I didn't have the same opportunity to make an A in
Right.
the more specialized
He
course.
gave them the exact same tests as he gave the other students and graded them in the same way.
But it was more
and-
personalized?
No, the same tests.
No, I'm talking about in class. Was it more
Well, it was
personalized?
more personalized
additional
because-
instruction?
Because he had them, there was a class
There
that
was
was
more
much
of a
smaller.
connection?
It was much smaller, and he was able to connect with them easier. And
versus 500 people.
And the bottom line, right, the bottom line was that these students' scores, in many cases, equal the scores of the rest of the class. And so it turned out that the SAT scores were not the
Determining factors?
determining factors that didn't really indicate their potential, and these students didn't realize their potential when they entered the University of Texas.
Well, and these students also
they got-
self-selected into
Right.
a special program.
they became intimidated, and when they hit their first failure, they fail the first test. They said, "Oh my God, I'm not as good as the rest of these students," and frequently their parents did not give them the type of support that since their parents didn't go to college, they
Well,
didn't
these
give,
are assumptions. You don't know that.
right, and those parents didn't give them the support that they needed. So in other words, if the students failed the test and didn't do well, they said, well, maybe you went to too hard a university. Why don't you drop out and go to the local community college? So it was that type of thing that he was discovering. But when they put them in a smaller class and let them know that there was somebody who was paying attention to them, they did much better. And they not only did they do better in his class, but they did better in the other classes, and their retention rate into the sophomore year was much higher than students who hadn't participated in his program.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Then he got tied in with another assistant professor at the University of Texas who was doing work in educational psychology.
Social
and-
psych, wasn't it?
Ed Psych. And what he discovered was that by giving these students a simple encouragement when they entered this university, in other words, having students who are seniors write letters, I believe, to them, explaining how they felt when they first entered the university.
So the isolationist.
They said, they
aspect
said, well, I felt
was slowly
overwhelmed, and
removed.
I bit by bit I overcame it, and now I'm graduating, and he had those.
You're not alone.
Right, and those students who received those letters were then. They did commentary on those letters, so they internalized it even more. It turned out
As well as told their own story, I
Right.
imagine.
no, they just internalized their.
Okay.
Eventually, when they went to higher grades, yes, then they could tell their own.
So was it
story.
only seniors, or was it upperclassmen in
It's-
general,
it's-
junior and senior?
I think juniors and seniors. So all of a sudden now you had one single little intervention, which was just a story from seniors and juniors and seniors saying that I was afraid and I didn't think I would do well, but yet I survived and I studied. That one simple intervention, which took a whole thing about an hour or so, the students who received that intervention, who were the lower socioeconomic groups, they too stayed at a much higher rate. They were
Retention rate.
rate. Yeah, so it's a very relatively inexpensive way of keeping your students. So,
It is a great way
right.
to engage more fully in the social aspects
Exactly.
within the university, within academia.
Exactly. So it can be done and relatively inexpensively, and done by the as illustrated by the
But it all
University of
began with an
Texas.
instructor that cared and wanted to see the best out of his students, to see everyone succeed.
Exactly. And for Technology and Education Today, I'm Richard Smith.
And I'm Caroline Crawford. Bye.